Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our webinar today, How Teach for America Uses Online Surveys. Before we get started, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items. So all callers will be muted. If you have questions during the webinar, feel free to use the chat box that you see on the left-hand side of your screen. If you lose your internet connection, you can reconnect using the link that was emailed to you, or if you have to drop off early, or if you want to watch the webinar again, we'll be hosting it on our website at TechSoup.org/community/events-webinars, and we'll also be sending an email with the presentation, the recording, and any relevant links. If you're on social media and if you like tweeting at us, you can tweet at us at TechSoup using hashtag #TSWebinars. But like I said earlier, we'll be using the chat box that you see on the left-hand side of your screen. So just a little bit about TechSoup before we get started. We are located in 236 countries and territories. We serve over 1 million nonprofits around the world offering discounted or donated technologies. We partner with several companies like Adobe, Intuit, Microsoft, Symantec, QuestionPro to make our mission possible. And if you're interested in finding out if your organization is eligible to receive these discounted or donated technologies, you can visit TechSoup.org/getproductdonations, and my colleague Zareen just chatted out the link if you are interested. And also today we are going to be discussing surveying, and if you're interested in getting QuestionPro once the webinar is over, you can find out more information at TechSoup.org/QuestionPro for pricing and more information. In addition to product donations and discounts, we also offer services, tech consulting, training, TechSoup courses, and free information and resources on our website. All right. So before we get started, I just want to make sure that you guys can hear me okay. So if you don't mind just typing in where you're calling in from, what city and state, and I can read a few of them out just to make sure that you guys can hear the sound okay. All right, so we have Janet from Orlando. We also have Dylan from Orlando. We have Shannon from Madison, Sandra from Denver, Nathan from Columbus, and Audra from Philly. Okay, cool. So it seems like you guys can hear me okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and make introductions. So on today's call, we have Alita Huck, who's the Director of Strategy at Teach for America. She was Teach for America's 2012 Indianapolis Core member, where she taught Algebra 2 and Pre-Calculus at a local charter school. She graduated from Indiana University with a degree in finance and currently pursuing an MBA at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. We also have Vivek Bhaskaran, who is the founder of QuestionPro. He grew up in India and graduated from Brigham Young University in Utah with a degree in computer engineering. He is also the author of Online Surveys for Dummies and has been an avid TechSoup supporter for over 3 years, and we really appreciate that. And we also have Zareen Kazi, who's going to be assisting with chat on the back end. And then myself, I'm Seema Tucker, and I'm the Senior Manager of Content here at TechSoup. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Vivek.
Thank you, Seema. Thank you, Seema, for that. Appreciate that. Hopefully everybody can hear me. And so I'll just briefly go over the agenda. So we'll talk a little bit about Teach for America and QuestionPro, who we are, what we do, and then we'll dive into online surveys and research. Really, I want to kind of, if you guys leave you with a couple of different kind of like practical, actionable things, a couple of tools and tips that we've been doing surveys for over many, many years. So we have gathered a lot of kind of ideas around how to do it right, how to do it wrong, and so I want to kind of really share that with you. And then we'll go over a couple of case studies. Alita will going to go through a couple of case studies on how she's actually used a survey and many surveys to, in fact, kind of make many decisions. And finally, we'll also talk a little bit about data, how to manage it, what are the kind of the broad implications of kind of doing data, making data-driven decisions. And finally, we will leave you guys with about 19 nonprofit survey templates that we've designed, measuring everything from volunteer to board satisfaction and so on and so forth. So that's the agenda for the afternoon, evening, or the afternoon today. Alita, can you tell us a little bit about Teach for America?
Yeah, Thanks, Vivek. So Teach for America is a national education nonprofit that was created in 1990 by Wendy Kopp. It was actually her senior thesis at Princeton when she realized that in the United States, unfortunately, like the quality of education, the zip code that you're born in, unfortunately, determines like the quality of education that you might receive. So from her thesis senior year, she created Teach for America, which has been around for 29 years now. And Teach for America's mission is to develop future leaders to strengthen the movement for education equity and excellence. So it's modeled off the Peace Corps, where recent college graduates do Teach for America for 2 years in 51 regions. So I was a 2012 Indianapolis Corps member. I taught Algebra 2 and Pre-Calculus. But the mission of Teach for America is also afterwards, where Corps members are encouraged to really like still encompass like what we learned while we were in the classroom, but also like in order to solve education inequity, we need to like be tackling the issues from like multiple layers. So we have over 60,000 alumni who are in Teach for America, and many of our alumni are in state Congress, Senate, running for governor, in medicine, in law, in business, who are like all tackling from different industries in order to like really one day close the education inequity gap. And so as a director of strategy on Teach for America, it's really been an awesome opportunity to be able to understand where Teach for America's position is currently in like not only just the education landscape, but also where we're just like in the competitive landscape now, like competitive landscape with recent college graduates, and also just try to understand grow and learn in order to make in order to just like continue to improve TFA. So later on I'll be going over a couple of case studies of how like we've used surveys and data to really make adjustments to a couple of strategies that we've had, and it's been really great to like actually make data-driven decisions in order to like inform like what our next steps can be.
Awesome. Just a little bit about QuestionPro. So we are an online survey platform, and we've been around quite a while, actually. I started the company back in 2005. We have about like you see on the slide, we're fairly global. We have about 150 employees. We have offices, throughout the planet, if you will. And I think we've been doing this for quite a while. And I mean, this goes to tell you that the need for surveys hasn't diminished. In fact, we've seen it grow manyfold over all these years. People used to do surveys back in 2005. People still do them. The need for collecting data and analyzing data is very real. And just a quick, before I jump into it, we've been kind of partners with TechSoup for almost 3 years now, I think. And it's been a great journey with TechSoup, and we've I think within TechSoup we have over 250 nonprofits using QuestionPro just through TechSoup itself. And so we have a great nonprofit presence within, great nonprofit community that we support, and we give it away free, obviously, and then TechSoup charges the administrative fee. So let's just jump right into it. It's around conducting online surveys. And the first thing that I like to kind of say is like, you can't just do a survey for the sake of doing a survey. You have to, you start with the decision that you're trying to go left or you're trying to go right. And that's kind of like what we define as the purpose for a survey. So we do see a lot of people come to us and say, hey, we want to just understand something. Well, you need to understand something to make a decision. You need to understand something to go left or to go right. So start with, if you start with the purpose of, in terms of decision-making criteria, then kind of your thinking evolves on like, okay, should we do A, should we do B, or should we do C? And we need to get some data to understand which one is the best way to do something. In the context of, nonprofit, like, okay, look, should we, can we improve? What can we do to really kind of, to get volunteers to sign up with us, for example? If that's the question, then you know you have a defined purpose, right? Anytime you run a project without a purpose, clearly we all know that it's very difficult to know, difficult to extract value out of it. So we always, one of the clear things that I always preach to folks who come to us, to our clients, both nonprofit and commercial, is start off with a purpose. You'll probably get better outcomes, better results, and then the process becomes much easier. So once you understand the purpose, once you kind of have a decisioning criteria, so okay, we need to understand should we take the left road or the right road, and then you can start collecting some data. Then that defines who you target. That also defines who are you serving. That also defines the kind of questions you ask, frankly. And that data is what informs your decision, and then you make the decision, and then you go on with your kind of model. Now let's take a look at surveys. If you kind of step back and say what is a survey in general, it's basically an instrument. It's a fancy way of saying it's a mechanism to measure attitudes, simply put, right? So what's in our head? Everybody's thinking something. Now, as I'm talking, you guys have an opinion about how I'm talking. And if I wanted to measure it, the easiest way to measure kind of how I'm talking is to kind of ask you questions, effectively conduct a poll of sorts, realistically, right? So what surveys and polls in general do is kind of fundamentally what they're intended to do is to measure experiences, measure attitudes. You can use correlate experience and attitudes to be the same thing, but generally that's kind of like a deeper understanding of surveys is not to just collect data, but really it's a proxy for measuring an attitude. And what are you measuring it? That changes over time and all that stuff. But that's the first thing that you have to kind of really once you absorb this, that surveys are a proxy for measuring some thinking process. What you do can be measured in a different way, but what you think can be measured using a survey. So that's why another way of putting it is we answer the why question. So we know that you walk from point A to point B, for example. That's a behavioral question. What surveys do is slightly different. They answer the why question. It's like, why did you go from point A to point B? And that's what they're intended to do. That's what they've been intended to do, and that's what they will do. Now, kind of diving into, okay, we get this part. How do we craft good questions? And the quality of the data really kind of comes down to crafting questions that that kind of correlate back to your purpose, correlate back to how do you design these questions. And before we go into it, like broadly speaking, in the research world, there's what's called a quantitative model and then a qualitative model for data collection. Quantitative model in this example is more metrics oriented and say, like, okay, look, I'm trying to measure a large variety, large group of people. And large could be anywhere between north of 50 or north of 25 to as high as thousands, frankly, right? If you want data from 50 people to 2,000 people, that's typically it's a quantitative model that you're going to use. A qualitative model, on the other hand, is more in-depth and usually done as a one-on-one interview. You can do online chat sessions and things like that. There's lots of ways to do that. You can get kind of go really deep. Think of another way to look at it is quantitative models allow you to go a little bit broad, and qualitative models allow you to go really deep. Clearly, you cannot have one-on-one interviews with thousands of people. I mean, since you cannot synthesize the data, typically qualitative models are used. Okay, look, once initially in any research process, typically initially you use a qualitative model. You talk to, for example, you talk to 5 customers, you talk to 5 volunteers, and say, hey, what's going on? How do you like this? And you get some amount of kind of intelligence from there, and then that informs that plus the purpose really informs the design of a quantitative model on top of that to say, look, you know what, we think that there might be a problem here, and so let us design the survey to uncover this problem and really kind of validate if there is a problem. And then you run the survey with the entire population. After that, that gives you some data that tells you, like, yes, there is a problem, or no, there's no problem. Everybody, most of the people are happy with what you're currently offering. So that's another way to kind of think about qualitative versus quantitative models for data collection. Now let's talk about kind of the question kind of models, the questions themselves. Within QuestionPro, obviously, it's reasonably easy to create create surveys. I think a lot of people have used online platforms for doing a lot of things. If you're doing email marketing or any other kind of online platform, we kind of we made it a point to make it point-click easy to create surveys, create questions, and deploy surveys effectively. So that's kind of part of what we do, and that's why, quite frankly, that's why customers use us, is because it's ridiculously easy. It's as easy as writing a Word document with questions and answers. Frankly, that's kind of our vision, and kind of that's kind of where we are. Apart from that, obviously, you can do smart stuff in terms of if you answer A to question 1, then you don't need to see question 2, and so on and so forth, depending upon kind of models that you guys that people come up with. And then logos, multilingual. So especially if your volunteers are Spanish as well as English-speaking folks who are volunteering for you, or if you need to have multilingual surveys, you want to make it easy for people in different languages to give you feedback. So all those things are reasonably easy to do, and everything is done on a point-and-click interface effectively. So now, the first tip I want to give, and I want to dive deeper a little bit into okay, how do we design surveys? The first tip that I would love to kind of offer you guys is around always include an open-ended question. So what do I mean when I say open-ended question? It's a comment box question, because more often than not, I've seen this happen a bunch of times where people are, okay, we need to ask these questions and we're done, and it leaves respondents with some level of kind of a bad taste. Many times they're like, oh, they never asked me about something else, right? And you cannot, frankly, as a designer of the survey, you really cannot anticipate what 1,000 people think, like every single combination, clearly, right? So you have certain things in mind, and you ask them about what they think, but eventually you must have some sort of a catch-all, if you will, right? A catch-all that allows people to give you some feedback about pretty much whatever they want to give you feedback on. And we strongly encourage that, having that open-ended comment, because that could open your eyes to a lot of things that you probably don't think about. And again, this is data that's coming into your system. That is data that you are absorbing, and this will only make you smarter and better as you go through the process. Now, let's talk about another tip that I like to give. It's about kind of carrying your brand throughout the survey, realistically. So a survey, we believe the survey also is an extension of your brand, extension of how you talk. It's almost like you giving a presentation to your board members, or to your volunteers, or to your employees. You always put your logo in there. There's a reason. It's because you want to carry the brand, you want to reinforce the brand, you want to let people know that this is who you are. And we strongly encourage that. Adding logos to your survey is actually as simple as adding logos to your PowerPoint deck next time you present it. So it's not that complicated. It's pretty easy to do, and I've seen a lot of surveys without it, and I always kind of say okay, look, put your brand in. It kind of creates kind of a level of intimacy. It creates a level of awareness. It also creates a level of connection, and these things. And we all know these things matter, right? And I do have a poll over here. It's an online poll. I like to ask questions, given kind of I'm in the business. I want to understand how many. There are about 90 folks on the. I can see 90 people over here. Can you guys can click on the poll over here, and I have this question in front of you guys. Does your nonprofit run with or without volunteers? How do you? I know there are a lot of nonprofits that actually run with volunteers, do not run with volunteers. This gives you kind of an idea of we have about 25 people so far. So again, as you can see, most of the folks are running with volunteers. A lot of people, almost 55, 9 out of 55 don't use volunteers, but pretty much everybody else uses volunteers, and 2/3 of them have never surveyed, but 1/3 of the people who have volunteers have surveyed them. So this gives you, again, this is a kind of a gives everybody an idea of now I have I have more data now, simply put, right? I have more data about who I'm speaking to, what kind of volunteer, especially vis-a-vis volunteers. I know that 2/3 of the folks who are running have volunteers, but I've never surveyed them. But at least 1/3 of them have surveyed them. So now I have I have more intelligence. I have more information about my audience, and therefore I can make kind of better decision in terms of how and what I relate to. Moving forward, and this is where I want to hand it off to Alita about truly making strategic decisions using data. Alita.
You guys hear me? Okay.
Yep, I can hear you.
Perfect. So the first example I'm going to go over is about how we use surveys to understand like this new fellowship we created. So in 2016, we realized that in order to attract like really like young college students, we needed to create like an internship program, a fellowship program. That's what all the top companies have. If you look across the board, like that's how they were attracting students to join their organization really early on. And so in 2017, we created this fellowship. It was the first year we were given grants from various foundations, over like $2 million, and we were like, okay, let's create this program, and the goal is that this would be like a flagship program for Teach for America. But because this was like the first year doing it, we had no idea if it was successful. We had no idea if it was going well, and so we started doing surveys. So we did like a pre-survey where we were like, okay, let's try to understand like the people we actually recruited and got into this fellowship. Like, why were they motivated to do this? Like, who are they? Well, about Teach for America and like also like their motivation of potentially joining Teach for America afterwards. And then if we do the same questions in the post survey, we can test like, did the fellowship actually make a difference? So for example, was someone came into the internship being like, I don't want to do Teach for America at all, but I'm going to do this cool internship. And then after this internship, did they like move up the needle? And we can like essentially say like, this is the benefit of this survey, benefit of the fellowship. So this fellowship went to 3 different cities across the United States to understand like education and equity in a rural setting, in an urban setting, and in a mid-sized setting. So they went, fellows like went to LA, Chicago, and LA, in the Rio Grande Valley. And so we did a survey after each region, and then we did a post-survey, and we were able to, one, make pivots throughout the summer, given what we were finding into internships. So like once I went from LA to Nashville, we were like, okay, these are the changes we need to make. And then at the end, we did this post-survey to really understand like, okay, when we go back to donors, when we go back to like Teach for America's like CEO and leadership, we can say like, this is the benefit of this fellowship, because like, look at how much like this fellowship changed attitudes, changed mindsets, encouraged people to actually join the organization because of this program. So the survey was an instrumental tool to like at the summer, and then now we use it every summer because we're 3 years in and we still need to continuously make improvements. So it's really helped us like understand the value of this fellowship. And then on the next case study, we also have another case study for early admissions into Teach for America. So early admission is a program that we created in 2012. And historically before, if you were a post-college graduate or a senior in college, you could apply to Teach for America. But given like just recent trends in the job market, we wanted juniors to apply to Teach for America. So we have a special junior early admissions program where we encourage juniors to apply to TFA, and then they'll find out their junior year, and then they can accept their senior year and like not have to worry about applying their last year of college. And so once again, like this is a huge initiative for Teach for America because one, we're trying to understand like how does it cannibalize like our senior market. How do we have to adjust our goals based on that? And also, like, who are the people we're getting? And, like, also, like, what should, like, our projected size be for early admissions? We use these, we use surveys all the time to understand, like, how many deadlines should we have for early admissions? Like, should we target certain schools for early admissions and not other schools? What should the projected course size be? Who should be the target of a student that we should apply, we should encourage to apply to early admission compared to like just senior admission. There's all these questions given like this is a recent new program too, and it's a huge initiative. So again, we're using surveys to understand like the people we're getting, their mindsets, also the ROI on our end, like is this being effective? How does this like compare to like our regular admissions deadlines and so forth. So those are two examples of like how Teach for America, when we're partaking in like really big initiatives, we really rely on surveys in order to make like data-driven decisions on like, are we on track, off track, and what changes do we need to make? And I will pass it back to Vivek.
Thank you, Anita. And I think I want to jump in terms of the pre and post modeling. If you think about it, like we do that, like outside of that, like a lot of our customers do that big when they undertake big projects, like even a website redesign, for example. We've worked with many clients. We're like, okay, we're going to do this kind of massive project about kind of redesigning our website because we don't think that it's working well. So another mechanism that a lot of our customers do is like, okay, look, before we spend gobs and gobs of money, the whole idea is to show that like, yeah, all this money you spent actually changes something. So they run a pre-survey on the website saying, hey, look, are you getting all the information that you want? Are you getting where you need to go? Do you feel that that the information is organized in a way that is comprehensive? And then you come back with a set of kind of results around it, and then you kind of run the project of kind of hiring an agency and going through the redesign process. And then at the end of it, then you run the survey, the new website comes out, and you run the exact same survey again, and you see like, okay, look, did we move the needle over here? So that's a great kind of, it has a great model, kind of alluded to like pre and post, but it's a very common model across the board in commercial land also. I kind of want to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about data-driven kind of decisions. So one way to look at it is like, forget about surveys. There's a lot of data that people can collect, and surveys happens to be clearly one one element of data. There's a lot of behavioral data. I mean, if you're using Google Analytics, there's data over there in terms of your website behavior patterns. But think of kind of what we want to also talk a little bit about, kind of making data-driven decisions and creating this concept of like, look, we need to be more data-driven because it's obviously it's more scientific, and more importantly, like you make better decisions. Your decision-making modeling becomes more science than art. Not that you don't need to have some art around the decision making. You don't have to go with your gut, but these decisions kind of change your to help you kind of validate what you feel. A lot of times, and I go into projects where people kind of like have a hunch, but they still want to kind of understand what's going on, even just to validate their hunch, if you will. And hunch and gut are, if you think about it, are the same thing, kind of obviously described slightly differently. So these are some of the, I'm not going to read through each and every one of them. These are some characteristics that we believe are kind of useful in an organization, and specifically in nonprofits, but I think it's actually valid even for kind of other kind of commercial entities, frankly, is around like, making, first of all, data-driven decisions has champions. It's an important part about has champions across all levels. People on the ground who are collecting the data and kind of manipulating and organizing the data, strategic people in the middle, as well as, senior decision making who believe that, we want to make better decisions, and we need to have data to empower making those better decisions. So that's kind of an important element across kind of characteristics, I would argue, if you want. I mean, not everybody is going to get, full score on every kind of element, but this is a good way to think about the different elements of how you manage data within your organization. Continuing on, we kind of like, I think there's a tongue-in-cheek saying is data is the new oil. So I always laugh about it when I hear it, but in general, we believe data is, most companies and everybody else, if you think about it, they do consider data as a strategic asset because it helps you competitively, obviously in the commercial side, kind of understanding what you're doing, what your competitors are doing, but in the mission-driven organization also is like, how effective are you? Simple. Data is your kind of proxy for effectiveness. We do a ton of work with with government entities also. The VA is a great example. They're under the gun to kind of describe effectiveness and kind of really kind of step up their game. And we do a ton of patient satisfaction surveys with them, and kind of that is their kind of anchor point around how effective their care delivery is effectively. So right now, because you can't really all the behavioral measures are not giving them the results that they want, but they're like more into attitudinal measurements right now. So I would whether it's behavioral or attitudinal data that you're collecting, I look at data as a strategic, and I would encourage you guys to look at it. Just both data and analysis is really as a strategic asset that can yield a lot of results over the long run. And then once you are collecting data, within the organization, different people need access to it, and we can present it in the form of PowerPoint decks, present it in the form of raw data. If they're really geeks, they want to geek out on it. Say, look, we have an SPSS data file. You can play around with it, or you can kind of like make meaning out of it and then have presentations around it. And then within the organization, I think a lot of times, have a mechanism by which the data is disseminated within the organization effectively. Because just collecting the data and having it collect dust is equally kind of generally useless. And having that data disseminated, and that's why if you look at earlier on in terms of the characteristics that I talked about, is having buy-in from executives as well as everybody within the organization around like, okay, look, we're going to collect this data, but we having their buy-in is usually important, because that helps you disseminate the data back to them to say like we had this problem, so here's what we collected. We done a survey, and this is what we found out, and they'll actually be interested in listening to the results of that survey effectively. So that's something to think about. And I obviously believe that kind of becoming data-driven should be a kind of a collective goal, not just the researcher's goal or not just one person group in the one person in the company. It generally helps a lot if the entire organization is kind of like bought into the idea that like we need to be data-driven. It doesn't have to be survey-driven, I would argue. Data, like I said earlier on, surveys just happen to be one form of data that we collect. But do we need to be data-driven? I think in the commercial world, we've all, obviously, you can see that from all the major tech players, us, everybody, including us. Like we collect a ton of data in terms of behavioral data, in terms of attitudinal data, because we believe that this is stored strategic for us, that it can help shape what we do. Every time we release new products, new features, we always kind of collect data around, like, did you like it? Did you not like it? What did you like about it? What did you not like about it? So that helps us redefine our product and create a better product. Our goal is to create an amazing product, and how do we get amazing at what we do? We just chip away at it one day at a time and make sure that we are listening to our customers actively. So that's another way of kind of thinking about kind of an organizationally. In our case, like clearly, like the leadership team in my company is kind of highly analytical. We all have kind of engineering degrees, so it's natural for us clearly. But I also understand like organizations like nonprofits who are mission driven and are purpose driven, but are not may not be kind of naturally kind of driven towards data and analytics, but clearly there are folks within organizations that can champion that as long as they are supported and they're pushed forward. And finally, I do want to kind of leave you guys with something. I've talked a bit about kind of conceptual things, but leave you with something reasonably tangible. We've designed and developed like a bunch of nonprofit templates. There are about 15 of them, I think. I thought we had 19, but actually it's 15. So these are templates that we've designed and kind of frankly developed based on kind of our kind of experience and we actually talked to a few of our existing nonprofit organizations, and kind of made kind of a universe of kind of different things that people want to understand, and we designed 15 different templates that all of you have access to. And frankly, even if you're not a QuestionPro customer, you still have access to it. We actually don't care. It's in that URL over there, and we'll probably send you a link with that URL link also to those templates. So if you have a QuestionPro account, you can obviously copy that template into your account and use that as a starting point for any one of these any one of these metrics that you want to measure. Again, we believe these are starting points. We're not saying this is the way you do it, but at least it's a starting point to get you started and get things moving. So that's also something that we're launching today. And okay, thank you, Zareen, for putting that on the Q&A thread over there. So you can click on that and go through that. I'm not going to go in detail, but effectively, as you can see, like we've kind of chosen most of what we know. We try to get 50-60% of everything covered, and hopefully some of these things are useful to you, even if it's a starting point for you to get thinking about what kind of data we collect, where do we run the surveys. I think that's about it for me. Again, thank you, Seema, and super thanks for Alita for jumping in and having this conversation. And I think we can go into Q&A mode right now.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Yeah. Thank you, Vivek and Alita, for the presentation. So just to the audience, if you guys have questions, we do have time to answer your questions, so feel free to use the chat box to type them in. So we have a couple that came in already, so I'll go ahead and get started. So I think for Vivek, how do you determine your indicators for your survey?
I guess by indicators, I go back to like what problem are you trying to solve, or what's the purpose of the survey. From there, you can say, let's take an example. Like, okay, we really want to make sure that we have a large group of volunteers. We want to make sure the volunteers are coming back again and again. Let's assume that. So that's a binary choice. Like, we want more volunteers to repeat. And that's kind of like the decision primary criteria. And from there, you'll come back with like, okay, they'll come back if they're happy, if they're satisfied with certain things. We assume that these are 4 things that they will probably be satisfied with, and let's measure those elements. So that if by indicators, that's the process that I use. Like, start from the top and then kind of work in your head, work through the list, and those indicators are the ones you measure. And then you can measure it in 5-point scales, 7-point scales, and we can go into an academic discussion on whether 5-point or 9-point scales matter. But frankly, a lot of times it doesn't even matter when you're just running a 5-point scale and say, hey, look, these are things that we think you care about. Rate us on a 1 to 5 scale. What do you think about these things? And that will give you some pretty quick intelligence right there around that. Hopefully that answers the question.
Perfect. Yeah. I have another question. For a lot of our organizations on this call are probably pretty small, so maybe 5 people or less. And maybe this question is a good one for Alita too. But if you don't have a data scientist, and if you are kind of resource strapped, what role who is usually kind of in charge of the data from what you guys have seen? Is it the executive director? Is it the volunteer manager, or is it the development director? So I guess it'd be kind of interesting to know who's usually tasked with that if you don't have a data scientist on hand.
Is that for me or for Alita?
I guess maybe Vivek, if you want to share from what you've seen with the nonprofits you've worked with, and then Alita can share her experience at Teach for America.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I think, Seema, I think the last, we did this with the Schaefer group. There was a pretty small organization, maybe 10 people or 5 people. It was the executive director that was running the service, frankly, right? I mean, I kind of put it back to people who are, I kind of put it back to folks who are kind of naturally inclined, kind of somewhat analytically inclined, who probably should take that on. And if it's the ED that's analytically inclined, he or she can take it on, or if there's somebody else in the group that takes it on. That's been at least kind of our experience. Alita, what do you think?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think having some sort of analytical background is always great. I think also though, a lot of teams that I work with at Teach for America, they're in similar spaces. There are a lot of people on their team aren't as analytically minded, but the great thing about QuestionPro is QuestionPro has reports that kind of summarizes a lot of the data for you too. And so what I found is sending those reports to the clients that I work with as well is also really helpful. And then like I will do my own data analysis in the end, doing multiple cuts and so forth. But like that report actually gives like a really basic overview of like if you ask this question, like how many people like ice cream, and if 30 out of 100 people said yes, like QuestionPro will already have a report for you with in the pie graph like 30% out of 100. So those reports are very like data visually friendly as well, that I found that a lot of people, regardless of like your analytical skill set, you're able to like understand at least on a basic level.
Okay, perfect. We have a couple of questions that have come in that are, I think people maybe are having trouble incentivizing people to take the surveys. So do you guys have any recommendations on how to incentivize people to actually take the survey? So Alita, maybe if you want to start with this one, and then Vivek, you can also share what you've seen.
This is definitely a issue that we see on a lot of surveys sometimes, and it depends on the like audience and what Vivek said, like the purpose of the survey. I think like a couple things that we've always try to highlight is like we try to do like but like like make it like 5 to 10 minutes and highlight it within like the subject or even the body of the email, saying like this will only take you a few minutes of your time, and like really make it like user friendly that way. And then also we do sometimes do like monetary incentives as well, given like if it is like an emergency question that we need to answer and we need to figure out what's going on, we'll work with QuestionPro to like do like monetary surveys, but I know that might not be realistic. So I think like for some organizations, so I think like really making it like as short as possible, but keeping those open-ended questions, keeping like the must-have questions, but really grounding it into the purpose, and like highlighting that in the email of like this will only take a few minutes. Please help. Like I think those are always like really helpful as well.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, monetary incentives kind of go a long way, but I also like to add, the purpose and the mission behind the survey. What are you guys trying to solve for? We are kind of soliciting people's feedback. You can give some amount of information. You don't want to give up everything, but you can give them some information as to what the data is going to be used for, right? You don't want to go down to the details about like, hey, we are trying to do this research about this, this, and this, and this, but you can go down, you can go at least at an abstract level, where you say like, look, this is what we're trying to solve for. We need your help. It's going to take 3 minutes of your time. Can you help us understand certain things? And that goes a long way in, obviously establishing trust, credibility, or and frankly, kind of, have people have to invest their time, and time is the only resource we have that is not unlimited. So, and we have to kind of look at it from that perspective. And then on the incentive side, clearly, like, and obviously Alita has used it, but we have kind of internal mechanisms. You don't have to incentivize every single respondent. If you really want to go down the incentive route, you can say like, 1 in 100 people get a $10 Amazon gift card, or 1 in 100 gets a $100 Amazon gift card. I mean, it's really up to you. So there's an incentive, baked-in incentive modeling also that's there that can be used. Although each of these strategies have their own kind of skews associated with it. And it really kind of like, I think going back to the question, like, okay, should we do this or that? Like you can try a couple of different ideas and see how it works for you.
All right. We have a couple of really good questions that just came in. So can you guys share, I think Vivek, this one's probably for you, what's a successful survey response rate?
It's actually, being a classic consultant, I'd say it depends, but realistically, like if you're surveying known entities, what I call known entities, like it's people you have a relationship with, clearly, right? Whether it be volunteers or board members or customers, typically known entities, you should get somewhere between 10 and 30%, 40%. Employees, typically it's north of 60, 70%. Effectively, so again, depends upon the audience you're trying to go to. So employee surveys are usually in the north of 60, 70% range, because the relationship between kind of employer-employee is extremely strong. Then the relationship between customer and kind of company or kind of volunteer and your organization really depends upon strength. That's slightly weaker, obviously not as strong as an employer-employee. So if you get 25-30%, the one thing I have noticed though, anytime like mission-driven organizations, like even government entities, we do a lot of work with the Washington State Transportation Commission. They are the commission in the state of Washington that is responsible for all tolling modelings and so on and so forth. And they have a pretty high response rate because people care about transportation. Clearly, everybody cares about transportation. It's the lifeblood of America in terms of getting from point A to point B. Are we going to put tolls? Are we going to put bridges? What are we going to do? So all the research that they do, we get north of 40-50% response rates because people care about the underlying mission. So that's what I would say. Like the closer you are to the strength of that relationship defines kind of response rate. Alita, what do you think?
Yeah, I think what you mentioned is very similar to what we get when we do surveys with when we do like broad surveys to employees or just like people that have like a close relationship with Teach for America. We usually get in the 60-70%. But then if we're doing like other surveys of like we're surveying like a college campus and we want to understand like what's the brand health of Teach for America on this college campus, well, we usually get like anywhere from like 10, 15, 20%, depending on the campus too. So I think, yeah, depending on your relationship with the person, the higher response rate, but I think that's when we have to utilize like the different incentives of like how we should survey people given like the relationship. So that's how we always look at the intersections, like who are we surveying and like so what type of survey should we do? This is the estimated response rate that we'll get. So like how should we design our survey based on that?
Okay, so we have another question here. This is a pretty interesting one. So in pre and post surveys, have you used pre-survey responses as custom metadata for your post surveys to track your survey's respondents' experience? So I think are your surveys, like if you are, I guess can they be kind of customized and can you send people down sort of a funnel based on their pre-survey questions?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the pre-post model, you could go back to the same set of respondents. I guess that's what it means. Like, let's say you gather a group of people and they take the survey on the pre-model, and then post, you go back to those exact same group of people. It really depends upon the volume of people you have. Frankly, that's my answer to that. Like, look, if you website-based modeling, like you have hundreds and thousands of users, you don't need to go back to the exact same folks because the survey itself represents everybody else. In some cases where sample size is extremely low and that's all you got, it does introduce some bias. There are some arguments around like doing the pre-post with the same group of people or a similar group of people. So if the sample size is reasonably small and it's very difficult for you to get another sample for that post kind of modeling, then you clearly have a pre and then you run the same survey against them. But if you can access to a large sample size, then I would submit that because the pre represents a larger sample size, you just do another post, for example.
Okay. And then we have another question here. So what are some best practices around reporting on actions taken based on survey results? So I think maybe Alita, if you want to share.
Alita, this is for you. Yeah, I think this is for you.
Yeah, so just to better understand this question, it's just like what have we done once we've received the data and how we communicate it?
Yeah, how you communicate it, and are there any like actions that you've taken once you have that data?
So usually the best way, like I think like depending on who your audience is like really important to like figure out how to tailor your communication. I have some teams that I work with who really like visuals and PowerPoints. I usually do that, or some written memos. So I think one, understanding who the data is going to is just as important as doing the data, doing the survey and the data analysis, because at the end of the day, you want to make sure that the person who's going to be informed with it understands like the big takeaways. In terms of like, for example, like how we've utilized the data. So for example, like in the Accelerate Fellowship case study that I had mentioned, like last year what we realized in our pre and post survey, that NPS, we had asked like the NPS question, like, so how likely would you recommend Teach for America to a friend or family? We asked that in the pre and the post survey, and we saw like a dramatic decline. And so that resulted in like senior leadership being like, okay, like what caused this? And like going afterwards and like me doing additional research, other than like beyond that NPS, so doing additional surveys, focus groups, and like using that question to really understand like this actually represented the root of like a couple of issues that we needed to figure out for this fellowship. And so they made all those changes this year, which was really great because it was like we were able to use like data that we found in the survey in the pre and post and say like, okay, something looks off, something looks weird, let's look into this more and let's actually make changes to the fellowship. And so this year's fellowship is completely different than last year's in many aspects given what we saw in the survey. And we were able to do that using data, and we were able to also like show senior leadership like this is what we're seeing based on what the data is showing.
Perfect. And you mentioned NPS. Can you just quickly explain what that is and why it's important?
Yeah. So NPS. I think I hear echo. NPS is a like a national survey question that companies use all over the board to really understand like how like attractive and like the company is. And so it's usually like how likely would you recommend like Nike to a friend or family member, or and then in nonprofits that's actually a question that not only like Teach for America uses, but like City or another nonprofit uses, and a couple other major nonprofits. I think there is a link that I can look for online that really utilizes that question to understand like the health of the nonprofit. So we've been tracking it at Teach for America for the last 5 years. After like Bain Consulting, we hired them, and they were like, this is what you and other nonprofits need to use to understand like where you are in the current landscape. And so it like customers will answer the question on a scale of like 0 to 10, and essentially it's like a score like says like how attractive the company is. So I know it's a common not only like brand question that like Nike, Comcast, other companies use, but actually the nonprofit world like Teach for America, City Gear, Peace Corps, they're also starting to utilize it in the last like 5 to 10 years as well.
All right. So, and it looks like Vivek sent out a link with a definition of the Net Promoter Score. All right, I think we have time for about one more question. So in terms of data visualizations, maybe you could talk a little bit about your recommendations on how to provide the data that you collect and turn it into a visualization. Vivek, I don't know if QuestionPro has that functionality, or if you guys, Alita, use something else to visualize the data.
I'll go really quickly and then I'll go really quickly and I'll hand it over to Alita. So we by default we produce a whole bunch of visualizations, including the statistical modeling and everything else. Pie charts, line charts, graphs. Specific ones. We talked about NPS a little bit. Our NPS comes off as a gauge and so on and so forth. So we've kind of spent quite a bit of time for we have 60 or 70 different question types. Each of them has kind of a visualization model associated with it. So by default, we can create those things, and even you can play around with it. And Alita, I'll let you kind of handle this and kind of give your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so definitely utilize a lot of the reports, like I had mentioned, that QuestionPro creates already on the front end of in a data visualization piece of the questions that we asked on the survey. I also utilize Excel, QuestionPro also gives you like raw data as well. And so I need to manipulate the data in any way and do like multiple cuts. You know, you don't need like a statistical package to like visualize that. You can have like basic Excel. That's how like you can download a lot of the data, and also like create like your own graphs using Excel based on like the subset of the data you need. So there are different like also like QuestionPro like gives us like PowerPoints, like pre-made graphs already, which is great, but also like they also give you raw data that you can also like do data manipulations and visualize it based on like what you specifically need as well.
All right. Okay, so I think that brings us towards the end of our webinar. Thank you again, Alita, and thank you again, Vivek. If you guys don't mind, we have a post-event survey, so once you guys close out of Ready Talk, you should see some questions pop up. And any feedback that you have for us is always helpful. We talked about that today of why it's important. So if you guys don't mind taking a few minutes, you know, we definitely incorporate that into our upcoming content. Also, if you're on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn, feel free to give us a follow. We post a lot of helpful tips and tricks there. And then also on our blog at blog.TechSoup.org. And then if you guys are interested, we have a couple of webinars coming up in July and August. So we have a Adobe webinar happening on July 23rd on how to use video to tell your organization's story. And then also security and privacy, what nonprofits need to know, happening in August. And if you are interested in taking any of our courses, we do have a 10% off coupon code for the TechSoup course of your choice. We offer things like Google Analytics, Facebook advertising, design, tech training, so on and so forth. You can see the full list at the URL listed here. And then we also offer TechSoup services, so help desk, managed IT, cloud implementation, Office 365 support. Again, if you're interested in QuestionPro, the URL is here, and then Zareen will be messaging it out in the chat box, and we'll also send it in the follow-up email. Thank you again, Vivek and Alita, and thank you to our attendees for staying on for the full hour, and thank you to our sponsor, ReadyTalk.